The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily represent those of any organization, including One Generation Away.
The freedom of a people to choose its leaders is the root of liberty.
Keep alive this experiment in liberty.
Liberty, in case you've forgotten, is the soul's right to breathe.
Government should be very minimal in protecting liberty.
Peace cannot be purchased at the cost of liberty.
The sturdy ground of liberty.
Liberty once lost is lost forever.
Fight for their liberty and for our security.
Guarantees individual liberty.
This great republic, born alone in liberty.
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 Just how much do you want liberty?
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner,
a production of LibertyNation.com.
Cutting through the double talk, taking on the topics, going after what the politicians really mean, and making it all clear. For your freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Joe Biden steps in it again and again. Can he even survive the left-wing gauntlet he'll have to run? Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. The man with the huge lead in the Democrats' presidential primary is under severe fire from the gang of progressive competitors after making almost inexplicable remarks about his warm relationship with Southern segregationists back in the day, as his problems continue to mount in the run-up to the first presidential debates this coming week. We'll outline the gory details of a god-awful week for the former vice president. Plus, a lot of action around the Supreme Court this week. LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza will break it all down for us. And what if everything you know is fake? That's the title of a new book on media bias, and we'll be joined by the author, Frank Miele.
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
We kick things off with our signature segment, Say What, where we roll out some of the most wacky, astonishing, damnable, and revealing things uttered by politicians and the chattering class. As many problems as Joe Biden had this week, and we'll get to all of those in a moment, there was a clear winner for the single most outrageous statement of the week, though the source is entirely unsurprising. It was the new goddess of progressive politics, the conscience of socialists everywhere, it seems, the young woman who was a bartender until 2 years ago and is now in rapid ascendancy as Democrats move further and further towards the electoral cliff. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez firing off a homemade video meant to reverse the facts on the ground, proving our southern border is being overwhelmed by immigrants seeking asylum.
The United States is running concentration camps on our southern border, and that is exactly what they are. They are concentration camps. This week, immigrant children were moved to the same internment camps where the Japanese were held. We are losing to an authoritarian and fascist presidency.
Just to set the record straight, those illegal immigrants and asylum seekers, now numbering about 75,000 a month, have led us to a breaking point. Even most Democrats are finally admitting it. And without the facilities to process all these people, some are being housed at a U.S. Army base that was once used to hold Japanese Americans during World War II. So AOC says we have concentration camps reminiscent of the ones Nazis built to exterminate millions of people, now built by a fascist American president. Yep, she really said that. You heard it. Now, Joe Biden, to say it was another bad week for the Democrats' presidential frontrunner, he's still way ahead in the primary race, would be perhaps the understatement of the year. At a private fundraiser this week, he spoke glowingly of his relationship with openly segregationist senators back in the good old days, saying he and they got things done, unlike now. and then inexplicably added that they never called him boy, just son. What? And his competitors for the nomination pounced.
I think it's misinformed and it's wrong.
We all have to work with people with whom we have very different points of view. But I think to be singing the praises of people who were vicious segregationists is not something that anybody...
But he was talking about working with them. Is that the same thing as singing their praises?
I'm not so sure about that.
I don't understand why he needs this lesson.
That was Kamala Harris, Bernie Sanders, and Spartacus Cory Booker, who demanded an apology from Biden, who got all indignant.
Apologize for what? Cory should apologize. He knows better. There's not a racist bone in my body. I've been involved in civil rights my whole career. The point I'm making is you don't have to agree. You don't have to like the people in terms of their views, but you just simply make the case and you beat them.
But is that really all he did with those Southern segregationist senators? Just beat them? Listen to Biden's glowing praise some 20 years ago for the most notorious segregationist of the late 20th century, Strom Thurmond.
Joe Biden is here tonight. He works for Strom Thurmond. I came to the United States Senate, a 29-year-old fella, out of the civil rights movement, a public defender, and turns out one of my closest friends ends up being Strom Thurmond. If you had told me when I entered the United States Senate that one of the people that I would have the closest relationship with in the Senate would be Strom Thurmond, I'd have told you that you were crazy.
And that may be exactly what his fellow Democratic presidential candidates are likely to say to Biden when the first presidential debates take place this coming Wednesday and Thursday. Good luck to him trying to defend his close relationship with Strom Thurmond when all those radical leftists running for president turn Biden into a punching bag. But that's not all. Listen to what Biden had to say also some 20 years ago about an issue that's become a matter of religion for the left, abortion rights.
I do not view abortion as a choice and a right. I think it's always a tragedy. See, I'm a bit of an odd man out in my party. I do not vote for funding for abortion. I voted against partial birth abortion.
Odd man out would be exactly the right term for Biden in this field of radicals, even after he recently reversed the position he held for 43 years on the Hyde Amendment and now says he supports federal funding for abortion. This guy, folks, could be out of the race before we know it. He's a 20th century liberal trying desperately to sound like a 21st century progressive, and it's just not working. Meanwhile, two of the students at Parkland High School who survived that famous shooting, David Hogg, now a gun control activist, and Kyle Kashuv, gun rights activist, were recently admitted to Harvard University, but then one of those admissions was rescinded. Care to guess which one? Yep, it was the gun rights guy Kashuv after some offensive tweets from when he was 16 years old a few years ago were discovered. So Harvard pulled the plug, and former Congressman David Jolly, one-time never-Trump Republican who quit the GOP, went on MSNBC and used it as a launching pad to attack Trump without using his name and signal his own virtue.
Within our culture, we have leaders who are giving greater permission to racist statements and people with racist feelings. They're giving them greater equity. I think it's important for Harvard to say, not in our community. That is not a voice that we are going to give equity in our diverse community. This young man posted, "Kill the effing Jews." He posted the N-word repeatedly, and he referred to one of these shoot-'em-up video games and suggested that they should put a map of that on his high school. Now, this was 2 years before Parkland. These are the social media postings we see of a shooter. The young man deserves redemption, but he also deserves a closer look to whether somebody with this profile should be able to purchase a firearm.
See how that works? The kid writes ignorant and offensive tweets, and he's profiled as a likely future shooter who should be stripped of his Second Amendment rights. Quick break, and then we're back to ask the question in a new book, what if everything you know is fake?
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Exhausted by all the fake news? On LibertyNation.com's YouTube channel, facts and fresh, bold analysis are what you get without the leftist spin. Subscribe today to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel because
Truth
is making
a comeback.
We believe that all men are entitled to the blessings of liberty.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
The Media Matrix. What if everything you know is fake? That's the name of a new book by Frank Miele, columnist at RealClearPolitics.com, moderator of HeartlandDiaryUSA.com, and longtime editor of the Daily Interlake in Kalispell, Montana, where he was managing editor for many years. His book tracks media bias over the last 15 years, going back to the days of the Bush 43 presidency. And Mr. Miele joins us now. Welcome to Liberty Nation Radio.
Thank you very much, Tim. Happy to be aboard.
I appreciate it. So let's start by drilling down on the title of your book, What If Everything You Know Is Fake? Are you implying that there's a conspiracy among the elite media to falsely portray the reality of America, or, as some have said, is such a conspiracy unnecessary because these elite media types all think the same way anyway?
Probably all of the above. Journalism is neither the problem nor the solution. It's really a symptom of the media matrix that I've proposed. And what that is, it's an information sphere that we're all living in. And we forget that it's not our native habitat. But in our information age that we exist in today, there's so much information that it's become almost irrelevant to us as people to figure out whether it's true, not true, important, not important. Everything inundates us on a daily basis to the point where journalists, just like everybody else, and possibly to a greater extent, are constantly, immersing themselves in information. And sometimes we forget to actually come up and breathe, look around and see where we're at. And so it becomes a kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy of doom that you just get sucked into this endless information flow without taking time to study it and find out what is real and what isn't real.
Now, Bush 43 consistently refused to respond to the persistent, vicious attacks from the elite media, totally unlike Donald Trump, who responds to everything. But Bush did win 2 terms, also, though, left office with approval numbers in the high 20s or low 30s. What does this say about the way that presidents have and should respond to media bias, do you think?
I think what we have come down to is that the fourth estate, as the media has called itself in the last couple of hundred years, feels that it has no checks and balances, that there's nothing that hinders it in its job, whereas they feel that they are the check and balance on government. And so that you've got this runaway train that becomes a law unto itself. And there's anytime anyone attacks it, they feel like they have been done wrong, but therefore they have no accountability.
As you see it, to what degree has President Trump and his persistent attacks on what he calls the fake news media, to what extent has that changed Americans' view and trust of the media, do you think?
Well, there's no doubt that the media is one of the least popular components of society and has been for many years. It didn't start with Trump. The journalists have generally had favorability ratings about the same level as Congress, which is in the low teens. So it isn't that Trump has educated people about their distrust of the media, but he certainly crystallizes it. And again, we're living in a time when opinion and fact have become distorted to the point where no one, and I would include, all of us in the journalism business, can be 100% sure that we're getting the straight story from anyone. And Trump serves kind of as a drumbeat daily reminder that just because you read it, it isn't necessarily true.
You talk in your book, as you have here on our discussion, about false information being peddled by the media, fake news, commingling opinion with fact. Which of the false narratives do you think has been most damaging?
There's absolutely no reason to accept anything you're hearing. And one of the things, that I would say is, your slogan, Liberty Nation, is truth is making a comeback. But I would say that, what we need to remember is we're kind of like Scully and Mulder on the X-Files. We know the truth is out there, but finding it is going to be one of the most comprehensively difficult things that we've ever done. It's it is looking for the proverbial needle in a haystack. I know you've done stuff on the tech world, the big tech takeover of our information, and there are forces at play here that are so big that we're basically living in a time of complete transition about what makes us human and how we respond to our environment and our daily living. Kids today, probably in the course of being 10 years old, have more information and more knowledge than Aristotle did when he died.
Let me close with this question. You've lived in Montana for more than 4 decades. That's part of flyover country and the voters most responsible for putting Donald Trump in the White House. Do you think these heartland and mountain state voters are as enthusiastic about Trump as they were in 2016? Less enthusiastic, or do they like him even more?
Media narrative right now is that Trump only has this small base of people that he can count on, and there's no way he can get reelected. The people are not going to tell the media that they have that 15% trust in what they really think. And I think with Trump's electoral magic, his campaign, persona, that he's going to be able to pull it out.
The book is The Media Matrix: What If Everything You Know is Fake? And the author, Frank Miele, has been our guest here on Liberty Nation Radio. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Miele.
Thanks, Tim.
Quick break, and then we're back with a busy week and big decisions from the United States Supreme Court.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Exhausted by all the fake news? On LibertyNation.com's YouTube channel, facts and fresh, bold analysis are what you get without the leftist spin. Subscribe today to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel, because
Truth
is making
a comeback.
And now we have reached the portion of Liberty Nation Radio which we entitle Talkin' Liberty, as we welcome back in our regular contributor, constitutional lawyer, and LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor, Scott Cosenza. Hello, Scott.
Hello, Tim.
All Supreme Court all the time. It's the stuff you live for. Let's start with the first of a number of interesting
tyranny,
decisions.
I think, as opposed to liberty.
Talking tyranny.
Yeah.
Well, that gives the listeners a hint as to what you're going to what you're going to say about this first decision.
I've never been one to conceal my cards.
Now,
deeply.
most people know Double Jeopardy from the game show or from the great movie Double Jeopardy, but this is a basic constitutional principle. It's in the Constitution. It's embedded that you should now be tried twice for the same crime. And yet the Supreme Court ruled that dual prosecutions at state and federal levels do not constitute double jeopardy. Explain it to us.
Oh, I can explain it to you, Tim. We'd have to have one of the 7 justices that agreed that that's what the law should be to explain to you.
Right. We should say it is a 7-2 decision. It wasn't a narrow 5-4.
I agree with the relatively odd couple of Justices Gorsuch and Ginsburg, who are increasingly ruling alike on things because they, at least for some of the liberty concerns, they meet in that libertarian-ish way. And Justice Ginsburg, in very limited instances, can have that judicial bearing as well. Justice Gorsuch has it seemingly all the time. He continues to impress from somebody who values liberty almost above all, Tim. He continues to impress with his service on the court. So he and Ginsburg have dissented. They've said clearly, I think that we can understand perhaps the counter-argument by explaining the argument that I do get, okay, which is that, and Justice Gorsuch lays this out in his dissent. Both Gorsuch and Ginsburg wrote separately in dissent from the majority opinion. And what Justice Gorsuch said was, you can be arrested at the state level. And so Mr. Gamble was arrested for being in possession of a firearm illegally. He was a previous convict, and he had a gun with him. I think it was a traffic stop. The police discovered the gun, and he was prosecuted by Alabama for that violation. The local federal prosecutor, though, didn't think that he was punished enough. I think he got a few years in prison for that charge. And, you know, it was probably one of these Operation whatever we hear about when the politicians claim they're going to get tough. And Mr. Gamble's the victim of that. And so the federal government then comes and says, you know what? Because he didn't get enough time, we're going to prosecute him because there's a federal law that says if you're a felon in possession of a firearm, that's a federal crime. Mr. Gamble says, hey, I don't know if you guys got the memo. I got arrested, tried, and convicted for this. Well, actually, I think he pled guilty. But in any case, he was arrested and convicted for this very charge. So how can you come after me? And the feds say, oh, that was an offense you committed against the state of Alabama. We are the United States of America. It's a completely separate offense. And Judge Gorsuch says, so you can be arrested in Alabama. You could be tried. You could actually be convicted or acquitted. Makes no difference. The prosecutor... The state prosecutor could take the entire evidence case, okay, knowing what they did and didn't do well at trial, right? So what worked and what didn't, and walk that right over to the federal courthouse and then work every day from that day until the end of the trial, with the federal prosecutor. And then the majority says that's no double jeopardy violation.
So let's talk about the ruling, the 7 that assented rather than the 2 that dissented, which you focused on. They're making the point that individual states and the federal government are dual sovereigns.
Yes.
In other words, they have separate authority, separate law, and therefore, according to 7 of the 9 justices, that gives the states the right to act as a sovereign every bit as much as the federal government. Yes. And that's an argument that I suppose has been made repeatedly over time. But is this just reaffirming something that the court has already asserted in the past?
What hasn't happened over what is new, Tim, is that we now have this huge body of federal criminal law. So it's important to remember that when the Constitution is written, has 3 federal crimes, right? You want to name them? Do you remember?
I don't. Well, treason's one.
Treason, piracy on the high seas. And what's the other most important thing for the federal government? Counterfeiting, that you don't counterfeit their money, okay?
Right. And that was 3 at the founding. And now, as we've discussed in the past, there's so many federal laws, they actually can't even be counted.
There's a guy there's some lawyer who has like a Twitter, and every day he just names more and more of them. It's just thousands and thousands and thousands of them. So these are all laws, by the way, that we're required to obey or go to prison. So, I mean, the idea that, one of the keystones of liberty, Tim, is that the criminal law should be easy for the people to understand and comply with. That's why it's so important that there are so many, because the sheer number in and of themselves is indicative of tyranny, Tim.
It seems like the issue of double jeopardy has come up in the past when someone has been found not guilty of a crime that many people thought or that they had committed, and then the federal government takes it up as a violation of civil rights, as a separate charge.
You're speaking, though, Tim, of people who are acting under color of authority, and so that's what's quite a bit different here. That is a common feature of what we've seen of civil rights cases. The Rodney King case, I think, in sort of my life, is the most prominent example of this happening that I sort of saw with my own eyes, which was the California state jury acquitted the officers of abusing Rodney King. The federal government said this is unacceptable. We all saw that tape. We're going to do it right. We're going to prosecute them federally for violating his federal civil rights. And I think that poses the obvious question. Can you come out differently on those two questions, that Mr. Gamble should not have to go to federal trial and the police officer should? And I would say that there could be an exception made for those acting under color of authority.
Was the fact that this man had already been convicted, does that change the case compared to, say, he had been found not guilty and then the federal government? I mean, because ordinarily you'd think, okay, there was not justice done at the state level, so we're going to do it at the federal level. But in this case, it's piling on a larger sentence.
I think for the news value of the story, that would be the case, but not for the Supreme Court analysis. Does jeopardy attach? If jeopardy attaches once, it cannot attach again. That is how the sort of lawyerly way to think about it, because then you have double jeopardy. So what the Supreme Court has ruled here is that we didn't have jeopardy in a sense before because it was a separate sovereign, like you mentioned, this dual sovereignty system. Now, Justice Gorsuch says, I don't know if you heard of this thing called the Civil War, but any idea that a state is a co-sovereign or we have any, that is a fiction now.
Well, Scott and I are just getting warmed up. We'll be back with another big Supreme Court decision on a public display of the cross, plus a couple of gun rulings in California, and the first in the nation nicotine tests for school children. Stay right there.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
We believe that all men are entitled to blessings of liberty.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
We're back talking liberty with LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza. So, Scott, a big ruling by the Supremes on what's called the Peace Cross, displayed publicly in Maryland to honor fallen soldiers from World War I. The court ruled it acceptable, but the decision was complicated.
This was a dog's breakfast of an opinion, Tim. I would like to read you the announcement of who agreed to what in this 7-2 plurality opinion, but it would take the entirety of the show to say this one agreed with that one on point 1, but not on points 3 through 5, but yes on 7, and it was one of those sort of things. I can tell you that Justice Ginsburg wrote the only dissent in the case, and I think Sotomayor signed on to it, which is you get the 7-2. And basically, if I could summarize the majority opinion, it's that we have to take into the entirety of the history of this thing, and to say that this cross represents an endorsement of religion, it doesn't really meet that test. And going forward, though, a new erection, this is a giant Latin cross is what the technical name for it, just a cross, a Christian cross that's on basically what has now become a median strip of highway to memorialize World War I dead. And clearly, it's a Christian memorial. And Justice Ginsburg says in her dissent, and let's be mindful, Justice Ginsburg, yes, that is a Jewish surname to be sure, and she is a Jew, and she says, and she actually, this was an oddity, Tim, you never see in a Supreme Court opinion anything other than words, typically. She included photographs, actually, of our war-dead cemeteries in Europe depicting the six-pointed Jewish star on the Jewish
I've
graves.
been to the one at Normandy, and there's a lot more crosses than there are Stars of David, but there's many, many Stars of David.
And her point is, you can't tell me that this isn't a Christian symbol. This isn't advocating Christendom. You would never have the six-pointed star, or you would never allow that symbol on a Jewish tombstone, because it is, in fact, a profession of Christianity. And therefore, under the First Amendment jurisprudence, it is an endorsement of Christianity and should be stricken. Now, that's, again, a 7-2 case.
Right. Once again, a controversial decision that's not a 5-4. In a way, that's a good thing to see some sort of melding between the constitutionalists and the progressives on the court, even if you don't like the individual decision.
That is exactly right. What you said at the end there. Even if you don't like it, and I don't like it. I don't know that I would have liked a different result, but the way it hashed out, I don't like it. But you said it. We can't, 5-4 and 5-4.
Yeah, that's not a good way to make final decisions on the law of the land.
Justice Scalia talked often about what you have then is you've got really one unelected person who decides all these key issues for America. And it was, when he was writing about it, it was Sandra Day O'Connor. And
now then it was Kennedy.
And maybe now it's no one. I don't know. We'll have to see.
I would have to say John Roberts, but it's not as clear as it was with Kennedy.
We've got more than 10 cases yet to come out for this term, so maybe the data will provide some guidance when it's all said and done.
Oh, your favorite time of year. It's like October for baseball fans. As we move out of the Supreme Court, but to a lower federal court, a judge has blocked a gun show ban at a California fairground.
Tim, I think there's a lot of misperception here about how gun shows work in this country, fueled in part by the anti-gunners when they talk about the gun show loophole and things like that. There are no gun show loopholes. And what I mean by that is there are no laws that regulate or govern the selling of guns outside a gun show versus inside a gun show. All the same laws apply. That's just it's kind of a lie of the anti-gun community, okay? So guns are bought and sold in gun shows, though, oftentimes, but legally. In Virginia, for instance, where I've been to gun shows, there are many gun sale transactions that go on. In fact, most of the vendors at an event like this are gun sellers. In California, that's not the case. You can't buy a gun at a gun show in California. It's specifically forbidden in California law. So what you can do is you can make a handshake deal to buy a gun at a later time. It's a preposterous.
It really is.
Yes,
that's typical California.
It is typical California. It's that one-step thinking that you talk about often, which is, we've got a problem with gun sales, which we don't, by the way. But that's what some politician read or somebody, some Twitter campaign.
Sounds
and
good.
They said, okay, well, here's what we'll do. We take care of that. We'll just ban gun sales at gun shows. There's no more problem there. And so this judge says that's a free speech violation. You can't. It's a legal product. They're not doing anything illegally. You just don't like them, okay? And you can't ban them for that reason. It's a government entity, and any person who is willing to pay the fee and conform to the rules that don't discriminate illegally should be able to rent from the venue.
Okay, let's move to another California decision. We spend half our time, if not more, probably 3/4 of it on stuff out of California. The California Department of Justice proposing emergency regulations requiring federally compliant IDs for all firearm and ammunition transfers.
This is just a quick story. Again, another California attempt to frustrate people from buying guns. California, anything they could do. So what's happened, Tim, is they can't ban them, which is what they wanted. Just wholesale ban, confiscation, whatever. And so just like we hear about these kind of wild restrictions on abortion from these places where these people go nuts for wanting to ban abortion, and then when they can't, they just do everything they can short of that just in order. Well, the same thing here. And so what they've said is, your regular ID that we gave you, that the state of California issued you to prove who you are, that's not good enough to buy a gun or even ammunition. They want this federally mandated real ID feature in order to even be able to buy ammunition in California. By the way, that's ammunition where in many states you don't have to it's just like you just walk in, you cash and carry. It's like buying a bottle of water, but not in California. This is any attempt to frustrate the exercise of the right. And what it does, Tim, while it certainly does not make it any safer for any Californian, in fact, it probably makes it more dangerous. What it does is it kills off any cultural expression of the celebration of the right to keep and bear arms. So you want to take your kid shooting, or you can't. They banned half the ranges. You got to drive 2 hours now. You got to fill out 40 forms. You got to have 3 different pieces of ID. Well, what that does is just suppress the interest and suppress the culture.
Right, that's going to really stop the criminals from using guns, won't it, Scott?
It'll stop. It'll just create an ocean more of criminals from the Californians who decide they're not going to comply with these ridiculous laws.
I can't help but go back to that slogan, which is so simple but so profound and so true. If guns are outlawed, only outlaws will have guns. One more story, and this one, as a vapor myself, I have an interest in it, although I'm not at the high school level, not past it a couple years ago. High school in southeast Nebraska, of all places, has introduced random nicotine tests.
They didn't learn their lesson from...
But this is not California, at least.
It's not California.
But it's Nebraska.
It is. So here's the thing that's just crazy. So the Supreme Court has said through a series of rulings, in fact, the most recent one was written by Justice Thomas, which said that the high schools could test for drugs of any kid who was good doing any kind of extracurricular activity. First, they started with athletics, and they said, well, they could because it was like a safety concern. You couldn't have some kid high who was, I don't know, in gymnastics, and then he would trip. And it was all a sham, by the way, that it was some safety thing. It was a crackdown on or an attempt to crack down on drugs. And then they expanded the program to any activity. And so the kids in like the chess club were suing to say, hey, there's no safety benefit. You don't need my urine in order to make me safe to play chess. And then the court ruled again, this is a Justice Thomas opinion, they said any kind of extracurricular activity, it's open season to require this type of testing, provided some things are met. Your analysis is not, like if it was a blood test, maybe that wouldn't have passed muster, okay, but this did. Now they're using it for nicotine. If you do want to do any kind of extracurricular activity, you're going to have to enter this. Basically, it's like a lottery. You don't have to be tested. You have to enter the lottery where your ticket might get pulled, though, and then you have to report. Use of nicotine is widely legal in society. Unlike use of cocaine, for instance. If you detect
or
cocaine,
in many states, marijuana.
Right. Well, now that's true. But when the cases went to the Supreme Court for the drug testing, that wasn't true. So that's why I make the distinction. But so if you're in a car with a kid, okay, and he detects a vape, if he's in a car with his friends, if he just is on a street corner and somebody exhales cigarette smoke towards him, he now tests positive for nicotine and will be kicked off the school's team, right? Then he's going to have to sue. So it's like this. When I first read this, Tim, this is what I thought of all the kids who don't actually break the law, even though I think it's a ridiculous law that we should throw a kid in a cage for having nicotine, but whatever. But for the kids who don't break the law, and they're still going to suffer the consequences of this, and that's what's going to happen. We're going to see suit after suit, assuming maybe not in this one Nebraska town, but all it takes, Tim, is one superintendent's going to read this news article, and we're going to see these, the testing regimes pop up all over and over. And mark my words, when we see the case that says, millions of dollars paid because so-and-so didn't get to his football scholarship because he got kicked off the football team because he walked through a cloud of vape smoke, outside. That's where we're headed.
Control freak nation, Scott.
If it's not mandated, it must be forbidden.
There you go. That summarizes the leftist control freak point of view perfectly. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Tim.
This program, Liberty Nation Radio and LibertyNation.com's own podcasts, The Uprising, hosted by Scott, and The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose with Managing Editor Mark Angelides, are available to you on demand anytime, any place, anywhere at LibertyNation.com. So that is it for this week, but we'll be back at you next week, same time, same station. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying, stand up for liberty. And we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.